My name is Doug. I'm a developer advocate with the Firebase team at Google. I work very closely with the Firebase team on Cloud Functions and on a variety of other Firebase products. In fact, there are, by my count, 17 products within the Firebase platform. I'm not going to talk about all of them today. That's too much to talk about. I'm going to talk about one in particular. But if you want to know what Firebase is as a platform, follow that short link down there. I wrote this blog post. It's about a 20-minute read, but it will cover everything in Firebase. Also, it's kind of funny, so give that a read. In particular, I want to talk about Cloud Functions today. So Cloud Functions is Google's serverless compute platform. It runs JavaScript or any language that can compile to JavaScript in a Node.js environment. It's what's known as serverless. So who here knows what serverless is? Can you define that? OK, not everyone. So I'll give us a primer on that. So a little bit about Cloud Functions. Cloud Functions is a Google Cloud product. It's not a Firebase product. Firebase adds APIs to it. So the core Cloud Functions product is a Google Cloud product, and then Firebase adds tooling and APIs and event providers. And I'll talk about that. It turns out most of the usage on Cloud Functions actually comes through Firebase. It's not actually through Cloud, just because Firebase adds so many awesome things that you can do on top of that. And I'll give some demos of that later. So what is serverless? Contrary to the name, there are servers in serverless. Sorry if the term is deceiving. There are always servers involved. You cannot get rid of the servers. So what does serverless compute mean? Well, there are servers, but you don't have to maintain them. So you don't provision an instance. You don't log into it. There's no credentials. There's no security patches. There's no OS updates. You don't worry about any of that. All you do is write and deploy code, and the servers are managed entirely for you. The server instances, which are entirely virtualized, automatically scale up and down. So as the load on your code increases, more server instances will be allocated for you. It's all transparent. You don't see it. There's what's called a cold start problem. So when a new server instance is allocated and your code first runs on it, there's some delay there as the server instance client warms up your code. So just be aware of that. But it will also scale down to 0. So if you're not using the product at all, you have 0 server instances allocated, and you pay for 0 if you're using 0. So the traditional billing system for traditional servers is you pay for one server instance, and if you're not using it, you pay for it. You just pay for monthly, like a flat fee. With serverless, it's almost exclusively billed in things like CPU seconds or memory seconds or network bandwidth. That's the only thing. So you you only pay for the bits that you use. And it's also event-driven. So when you deploy code to Cloud Functions, it's not a program you run, kind of like a console program. It's just waiting for things to happen. These events are the things that you're triggered on. So when you deploy your code, it does nothing until one of these events is trapped by the system, gets routed to your function. So when I say that Cloud Functions is event-driven, this is kind of what it looks like. You have a series of event providers. These are the things that are generating events. And they're almost like here, it's a bunch of Cloud and Firebase products. And these things are going to emit events, maybe quickly, maybe slowly, depends on what kind of usage you're getting. And these get corralled by Cloud Functions. So Cloud Functions is intercepting all of these events, and it's looking to see which ones might be interesting to your code. And if it figures out there's a function that's interested in one of these events, it'll trigger it for you. So that function gets delivered an event. You can do whatever you want with it, and then exit. And that's all there is to it. So the event providers that are available today are these. Most of these are products, except for HTTP. That's just creating a web API or a web endpoint. PubSub. Most mobile app developers don't need PubSub, but the rest of these are very commonly used for mobile apps. So who here works with mobile apps at all? Web, iOS, Android? OK, so about half of you. So uploads to cloud storage will generate events. Changes to Cloud Firestore and real-time database. So Firestore and real-time database are cloud-hosted NoSQL databases. So what you can do is set up an event provider or an event trigger that looks to see if something changed in your database and respond to it. So database triggers are probably one of the more common use cases. With Crashlytics, you can trigger when there's a velocity alert. For authentication, you can trigger when users are added or removed. In analytics, you can trigger some code when there's a conversion event. So if a user does something in your app that triggers a conversion event, like a purchase, you can have some code triggered that responds to that. So that's all neat. But what I'm going to do mostly today is demo it for you. So Cloud Functions is really neat. You can talk about it all day, but I think the real power in Cloud Functions lies in what you can actually do with it. So let me see. So I've already created, this is the Firebase console. I've already created a project here. I've also configured it a little bit. There's some boring setup steps, like I had to enable billing for some of the APIs. Now you can use Cloud Functions without enabling billing, but some of the APIs I'm using do require billing. I've also enabled like the Cloud Vision and Spreadsheets APIs, and I'll show you a little bit about that later. But given that you already have a project set up, I'm going to create a project space. I already have now Node installed. I have npm installed. I have the Firebase CLI installed. These are all important tools to have. So once you have all these installed, you can start developing. Who here does Node? Anyone here? OK, smaller now. OK, so this is one of the big learning curves for Cloud Functions. Since you can only write Firebase triggers in Node.js with JavaScript right now, that is something you have to learn. It's not that bad, especially if you already know some JavaScript. I'm going to do all my coding in TypeScript, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. So what I'm going to do here is go into that space and go ahead and initialize a new project. So I'm going to initialize functions. Unfortunately, this is a poorly rendered Firebase. That should say Firebase, but I'll select my project. And let's make this a little bit bigger, actually. Here we go. Now I can choose my language. No matter what you choose, the CLI is going to create some scaffolding for you. I like TypeScript. TypeScript is basically JavaScript with types added to it and some other convenient things. So if you know JavaScript, it doesn't scale very well as a language. You're throwing objects around. You're throwing functions around. None of it is strongly typed. You basically have numbers and objects and arrays and undefined, right? I mean, it's kind of like, if you're dealing with a lot of data, it's kind of hard to deal with. So with TypeScript, you can add types to it. So I'll select that. And I'll also say yes to adding TSLint. So TSLint is a linter that understands TypeScript very well, and it will give you some clues about what's going on that or could be going wrong. And it's going to create some scaffolding. I'm going to say no to installing dependencies now, just because I'm going to do that later. So I use a program called VS Code for doing all my editing. VS Code is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Let's make this bigger. And we can see the scaffolding it created. So if you're familiar with Node, you know something called package.json. It's a description of basically everything in your app. Kind of like if you do Android, I do a lot of Android, so your Gradle file is kind of like this. So it'll set up a bunch of npm commands that you can use for development. This is the entry point into your code. These are some dependencies that you use. And since TypeScript is a transpiled language, I need developer tools to turn that TypeScript into JavaScript before I actually deploy it. So I'm going to update all of these, actually. First thing I do when I create any new project is update all the things. So I'm going to npm install Firebase admin and Firebase functions. And depending on how good the Wi-Fi here is, this could take a little bit of time. I could just keep talking about Ohio things. Establish my credentials. I'm one of you. I really am. And it's off. So if you're not familiar with the Node ecosystem, there are something like 350,000 Node modules available through NPM. So NPM is Node Package Manager. It's basically your package management system. What I did is I just told NPM, go and get all those packages and all their dependencies and put them in my project. And they'll end up in a directory called Node modules here. So I got that. And I'm also going to, for development, I'm going to use TSLint and TypeScript. So I'm basically just updating everything that's in here, and you'll see these numbers change. All right, so now we have all the latest stuff, which is good. Now, part of the scaffolding creates an index.ts file, and this is basically your hello world. So I can actually get started with this right now and get rid of all these silly semicolons, because who uses semicolons these days? It's so gauche. All right, so now I have a hello world function. This is an HTTP endpoint. So what we've done here is say, hey, I'm going to use the functions SDK. I'm going to create an HTTP endpoint. When a request is incoming, it's going to receive a request object and a response. If you know Express.js, you will be very familiar here, because these are just Express.js objects. So very common, very popular HTTP library. And we'll just send a response back to the client. And I'll pretty this up a little bit with a new line. So to deploy this, all I have to do is Firebase deploy. And that's it. Actually, what I'm going to do first is actually Firebase serve. So what this does, it will actually look at my functions and emulate them locally. Oh, that's unfortunate. That's interesting. I'll just go ahead and deploy it. I won't serve. So with Firebase Serve, the idea is that you can have a local emulator and a local URL, a local host endpoint. You can test your functions that way. I don't know what's going on right there, but I will just instead go ahead and deploy it to the project. And this takes a little bit of time. The first deploy is typically very slow as it sets up the project. Since my project's already created and all the APIs are enabled, this goes a little bit faster. But local emulation is important because when you're doing local testing, that goes a lot faster than remote testing. So going through this deploy process every time you change and edit your code is kind of slow. So I would recommend looking into learning how the emulator works, both for HTTP functions and other types of functions. Creating Node.js. So a little bit here. Node.js 6 is currently the default runtime. The Node.js 8 is available in beta. You can choose that in the CLI. Right now, I'm just taking the default, which is fine. And then after deploy, it's going to give me a URL. This new URL I can hit with, let's see, I'm going to hit it with curl. And there it worked. So couldn't be easier. But this is kind of a lame program, right? Who does, hello world, so what? Well, I want to do something more interesting. I think what I'd rather do here is actually work with something in the database. So let me switch back over here. I'm going to load up. So right now we're looking in Firestore. So the way Firestore works is you're obliged to put all of your data in something called collections. So let's just imagine I have a chat room, because that's what we always implement is chat rooms. So let's imagine that each document, so I already added a collection. Now what I'm going to do is add documents within that collection. Let's just say I have a text field, and it says hello world. So after I create that, I have a collection called messages. I have a document with a random ID here, and each document has a text field called hello world. Now this is kind of uninteresting. Normally there would be more here. Normally there'd be like a timestamp or some other metadata, but I'm keeping it simple right here. So let's say I have documents in here like this. Now let's say I want to create an API to fetch all the documents from Firestore. Well, what I do here is import the admin SDK. So the Firebase admin is an SDK that lets you deal with programmatically parts of Firebase. So real-time database, Firestore, authentication, cloud messaging. You have a bunch of different APIs to deal with. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of just echoing back hello world, I'm going to actually reach into the admin SDK. I'm interested in Firestore. I want to use the collection called messages. And I want to get that entire collection. So this will return everything. Now this returns a promise. And for those of you familiar with JavaScript, you know this is asynchronous, right? So you need to do something to deal with this promise. I'm going to use async await. I'm not going to use then and catch. And this is going to return me a snapshot. So the snapshot is going to contain a query snapshot. And this represents all of the documents that are in play. Now, what I can do here is reach into the docs property. This docs property is basically an array of all the documents that we fetched. Now, I don't want the documents themselves. I want to return some JSON to the client. So I can get the raw data from the documents by calling the data method on each of the documents. So what I'm going to do is be JavaScripty and say, iterate all the documents. For each doc, I want to return the doc data. And so results. And then this results should be, it's an array of document data. Document data doesn't say anything. It doesn't have any special type. It's just basically saying all the properties in the document are going to be in this object somewhere. And then what I can do is response send results. All right. So what I can do is deploy this. Oh, what's wrong with await? Oh, I have to make this async. Alrighty. Now everything's OK. So go ahead and deploy this. Actually, while this is happening, I'm going to start to actually refactor some of this code a little bit, because I'm going to create a bunch of functions. What I want to do here is actually create a new file. And then what I'm going to do is copy copy this in here. Oh, you know what? This isn't going to work because I didn't call admin initialize app. I forgot one important thing. Let's see. That deploy, I'm going to ignore it, but I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. I need to import the functions SDK. And inside index.ts, what I'm going to do here is just say export from. So I'm going to export the hello world function from here. I'm going to initialize the admin SDK for everyone, for all my functions. And just go ahead and save that. So what I've done here is I'm basically splitting up all my functions into different modules. So I have a hello world module that exports my hello world function. Then it gets re-exported through index.ts. So what Cloud Functions is, oh, we have a problem. Aha. All right, let's try this one more time. So what it's going to do is Cloud Functions is going to look at my index.ts, actually my compiled index.js. So what's happening is the compiler is putting all of these compiled versions. So what's actually going on is this compiled TypeScript, transpiled TypeScript is what Cloud Functions is looking at. It's going to take all the exported functions and deploy them individually. But we don't want to look at the ugly JavaScript. We want to look at the nice TypeScript. All right. And we'll hit this with curl again. Oh no. What could be going on? Well, we can go look at the console and see if there's logs here. Oh no, there's no error. Let's try this one more time. Uh-oh. We're going to have a demo fail already. Oh, here we go. Default Firebase app does not. I did call. I thought this would have worked. So the way TypeScript works is, I thought initialize app had to be the. Let's just try it this way. Deploy, deploy, deploy. All right, let's try one more time. And we have data. So here's an array of objects with a text property and a message. So you can see that matches what we have, what we had here for Firestore. So basically, pulled down all the documents. So you notice here, what we did is we actually created just a really simple web API for data that's in Firestore. This is a very common use case for Cloud Functions. So typically what you do is you can create a REST API. You can process the query string if you don't want to do REST-style parameters. But it's really easy, as you can see, to generate pretty simple APIs. Now, hello world is fine. But what I'd rather do now is implement a function that does something more interesting here. So let's see, what do I want to do is, what do I want to do? How about convert messages? And let's see, I want to start with the same scaffolding here. But instead of creating a hello world, I'm going to create a convert messages function. Not going to be an HTTP function. I want to make a Firestore function. So what I can do now is trigger when documents are changed within the database. So I can say, whenever a document that matches messages with some wildcard ID. So this is saying anything in the messages collection that matches this wildcard ID. When a document is created, I can take the snapshot of the document. Actually, let me split this on another line so it's easier to see. And with the snapshot, this snapshot represents the data that was just added in the document. So what I can do is take the data out of it. Take the data out of it. Actually, I have to await it. Oh, no, wait, I don't have to await that. I can say data. Maybe what I want to do here is process these messages. So like I said, I went to OSU. We call that Ohio State University or the Ohio State University. So what if I want to expand the text OSU anywhere in a text string and call it Ohio State University? So what I can do here is say the text property of that message. I want to, let's see, actually, I'll do it this way. Const text, I'm going to type it to a string. And what I'm going to do is text replace OSU with Ohio State University. And this is still not quite right. We know it's the Ohio State University. This is an important thing to know. Let's see. And what I want to do is write this into the firestore document. So the snapshot has a ref property, so anytime you need to write to firestore, you need a reference. And that reference you can use to update, pass it an object with the properties you want to update. So what I can do here is say, well, I want to update the text with this replaced text. And I also have to await this. All right. Now, actually, I'm going to do one more thing. This initialize app is going to conflict with the other one. Now, what I can do here is I can deploy this. Oop. Now, the Firebase CLI is going to look at, oh, this actually isn't going to work. Close this up. I need to export this one as well. All right. Let's do that one. Now, the Firebase CLI is going to look at all of the exported functions from your index.js. So you can see it's deploying both convert message and hello world. We actually don't want to do that. Since I didn't change hello world, there's no point in me trying to deploy it again. So the next time I'm going to run the Firebase CLI, I'll say I just want to deploy my changed function. The deploy will take a little extra time because now it's doing two different things. It's worth noting that each one of these functions is deployed in complete isolation from each other. So when a server instance is spun up, that server instance is only ever going to handle requests for that one function. It's not like one server instance with all the functions. Everything is completely isolated. That's how serverless works for Cloud Functions. So what I can do now is I'll switch back here. Now if I add a document, give it an auto ID. And I'll say I went to, actually, I'm just going to say hello again. And I would expect nothing to happen, but if I say I went. See, it automatically replaced. Let's do that one more time. Go OSU Buckeyes. Now, let's be excited about it. Yeah, so now you can start to see how powerful Cloud Functions is. So now what you can do is, one of the more traditional examples is you can do some sort of like moderation of messages. So the idea is you would look for, like things that people are not supposed to say, bad words, and then filter them out. Or you can turn words into emojis. You see these examples a lot. It makes it very possible to implement logic that you don't trust on the client. So, clients can be compromised. It's really easy to do so, especially if you have a web client. Even if you're doing Android or iOS, you can expect that people will decompile your app, change the way that it works, recompile it, and run it. Every client app can be compromised. So if there's logic you want to put in your app that you don't trust to be compromised, put it on the server. Put it in Cloud Functions. It's a really good way to sort of keep prying eyes from getting into your code. So now we have all these functions. And just for fun, we can go back to that endpoint that'll fetch all of the data. Oh, this may not work if I took out the initialize app. Oh, I might get another error. Oh, no, it worked. OK, so now we have all the messages in here. So pretty cool. All right, so that's some pretty straightforward examples. One of the things I like about Cloud Functions is that it's really easy to glue together other parts of Cloud and Firebase. So I have some already staged examples here. So if I go into, let's see, what kind of other example do we have? How about on upload image? OK, so what I did here is I have a new function. Now what this does, just as a reminder, in order to run this sample, I needed to enable billing on my project. I needed to enable the Cloud Vision API. And I need to run this npm command just to get the Cloud Vision API added to my project. And what it does is there's a web page that goes along with this. And what you can do is drag images into that. And what it'll do is it'll try to identify things from those images and put them back in the web page. So another thing I need to do is actually, that's actually one thing I should do first is I'll need to initialize hosting here. So Firebase hosting is a way to do web hosting. That works pretty well with Cloud Functions. I'll go ahead and set up hosting. OK, so it created some scaffolding. Now what I want to do here is copy the, let's see, stage, public, upload. I need to copy recursively. So now what I have here is, oh, I put it in public. There we go. Yes, I want to move. So now what I can do is I have an upload with an index.html, which all it does is provide an upload box. You can't really see that here. And then there's some JavaScript in here. What it does is it handles the drag and drop of an image onto an element in the HTML form. It'll do a bunch of things like basically it's using cloud storage to upload a file. So what it's going to do is, and I did this around Christmas, so it was all like Christmas greetings and stuff like that. So what I did is figure out where to upload this file in storage, use the Firebase SDK to actually store that, then get a download URL from that and update the database. So this is actually writing to real-time database, not to firestore. So what I can do here is, let's see, how should I do this? Firebase serve only hosting. Let's see. OK, so now I have this place to drop images. Now, let's see, give me another terminal. Where are some good images here? Oh boy, which one of these should I use? Well, we'll come back to that. All right, so let's get back into the Cloud Functions. So what I'm doing in here is I am pulling in the Cloud Vision API, and I don't know why that's squiggly red. It should be installed now. OK, yeah, it's installed. All right, so what I'm saying here is there's a function called onUploadImage, which uses the functions SDK to respond to changes in my cloud storage bucket. When an object in there is finalized, meaning it's fully written, I'm going to get a representation of that object, parse out the path parts of the file name, make sure it lives in the images directory, because I don't want to respond to any file being uploaded. I only want things that are being uploaded to an images directory. Then I'm going to initialize the Cloud Vision API, construct a URL to that to the file that was just uploaded. So that gs:// that's just Google storage URL. So this is saying the file that landed in that bucket, I'm going to create a URL to it, and I'm going to pass that URL off to the Cloud Vision API. Then when it's done, I'm going to have a label annotations object, and then what I can do is write back to the database in the images node under the unique ID for that, all of the annotated images. So this is just, all this is doing is saying when a file is uploaded, send it to the Cloud Vision API and then write the results back into the database. Pretty straightforward, but actually kind of powerful. So what I'm going to do here, since I don't trust my initialize app anymore in a different area, I'm going to put it here. All right, now what I'm going to do is Firebase deploy only functions and then the name of this function. So that we'll skip all the others and just do this one. And now let's see, go. Oh, was there an error? Oh, I didn't export it from here. OK, now it should find it. Now we need to find, let's see, how about in documents? How about? Oh, these are animated GIFs. How about some memes? That's not one. There's a good one. I'm really quite cross. Oh no, we had another problem. Oh, it's that initialize app thing again. I didn't save that file. At least the demos are working. Not having total demo fails. It's kind of annoying because sometimes when you deploy a function, it's not fully active until like some amount of time after the deploy completes. This is I would say a bug or an unintended behavior that technically should have been fixed yesterday. I was looking at the diffs for that. Fortunately, we haven't had any problems with delays on fully activating a function, but it's been going well so far. All right, so back to here. So let's move. Can I move this over? Oh, let's see. I want to move this. All right, let's see if this works. Go. So here, oh, there we go. So public space, street, car, vehicle, road, city, window, building. Not actually the best detection here. Let's see, what other? What if I send it the Firebase catalog? Text yellow. Actually, let me blow this up so you can see it's a little bigger. So I uploaded this picture, and what it found out of it was there's text, yellow font, diagram, product line. So not bad. So pretty powerful, right? I wrote just a little. Well, I didn't write it just now. I didn't live code it, but you can see it's pretty straightforward. Just wait for a file to be uploaded, send it to the Vision API, then update the database. And you can see. I'll show you what the database looks like here. So let's see. This isn't in Firestore, but it's in real-time database. And you can see that this is what happened. The client put in the URL, then the server put in the labels for that. So you have the client and the server kind of cooperating in this database space. So that's another neat thing you can do. One more demo. All right, let me copy in from stage function source. How about copy scores to sheet? OK, so what this one does is it uses the Google Sheets API. So you can programmatically mess with Google Sheets. So G Suite has actually very robust APIs for reading and writing Google Docs, Google Sheets. I think can you write presentations? Basically, you can programmatically access a lot of things in your G Suite's account. So what I'll need to do is install a couple more modules. So Lodash is just a sort of a general JavaScript programmer's utility module. And Google APIs gets me the Google Sheets API, among all other things. So with these installed, oh, why can't you find Google APIs? What's wrong here? That can't be right. Well, we'll just go ahead and see if it works anyway. So what this function needs is, the way I've written it already, it needs a unique sheet ID. So I already have a Google Sheet set up. So what I can do is, the way Google Sheets works is the unique ID for a sheet is in the URL. That's the easiest way to find it. So I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to need a service account from Firebase. So a service account is basically your credentials for doing administrative stuff in your account. So what I'm going to need to do is go into my project settings, find a service account, generate a new private key. This is going to download me a file, which I will move into place here. So where did that download? Downloads. OK, so that's my service account, and it needs it in a file called service-account.json. So I'm going to copy that actually right here. So now that appears in here. So this is all I really need out of it is this client email. So every service account effectively has an email address associated with it. It doesn't actually serve email, but it's kind of like a unique identifier. I'm going to need this email address. And put it into here. So, oh no, wait, I don't actually need to copy it. So what it's doing is it's requiring this JSON file, then creating a Jute client. And JWT, a Jute, is basically how Google does authentication internally. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the email address from this, and it's going to take the private key from this, basically username and password, and say, I want to authenticate a client that has access to spreadsheets. That's all this code is saying. And then I'll call authorize. That'll return a promise, which I can then use later on in the Sheets API. OK, so what happens here is this is a function called copy scores to sheet, using the functions SDK to create a database trigger, not firestore, real-time database trigger. And anytime anything changes in the location called scores, if anything is updated in there, I'm going to get a change object. And this change object describes what happened in the database. So basically, I want to take everything that is in the location of that database. I want to sort it. This is just some JavaScript to sort all of those values and convert them into something nicer. Then what I'm going to use is the Spreadsheets API with my authenticated client and the spreadsheet ID. I want to take this range. And this range is saying, in the scores sheet, from cells A2 through B7, so that rectangle described by A2 through B7, I'm going to put these values inside it. So I'm going to write the contents of the database into the spreadsheet. And it'll happen anytime anything changes. So this is pretty powerful. I think you would agree. Let's try to do the I'm not using the admin SDK here. I don't need to initialize it. OK, so what's this function called again? Copy scores to sheet. Now, the other thing I need to do is I need to take that email address, and in my spreadsheet, I actually need to give it access. I need to give this account access to that email address. So what I need to do is actually give edit access to this service account. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to read and write that sheet. So when I've done that, oh, I didn't do the export thing again. This is the first time I've done this demo. I'm so amateur at this. Oops. All right, let's try this one more time. you can see that when you do a deploy, it's doing some things for you. It's running TS-lent against your project. So if there's any problems with the code, you'll know about it. It's also running TSC, which is the TypeScript compiler. So that's what's going on when it's taking that TypeScript and turning it into JavaScript. So you can run these commands yourself, but the deploy command does all this for you. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and get into my I'm actually going to pull. Whoop. I'm going to pull this out. Oh. OK, so what I want is the sheet on this side. Let's make this bigger. And I want the database on this side. Some nice responsive design there. Create a scores node. Let's see. Doug has 1 point. What's your name? Trey. You have 2 points. I see an Eric. Eric, you have 3 points. All right, so assuming that this deploy worked OK, all right. What I'm hoping is that when I update the scores here, I would hope to see them appear in here. Do it. Of course, it might be that thing where functions don't get executed immediately. Maybe I have to wait. There we go. All right. So now I'm gonna come back into the lead here, and then Trey's gonna knock it out of the park. So yeah, so now think about this. This is a very simple example. It's kind of who would actually do this, like create a little spreadsheet with scores? Like, how is this useful? Well, if you think about it, what you can do now is use tools that are not mobile apps to replace your mobile apps. So one of the things I like to say is, don't write an app if you can get someone else to write it for you. Well, it turns out Google Sheets is an app, right? And now what you've done is you've basically coded for Google Sheets. So if you had, say, a game with a real-time leaderboard, now what you can do is point people toward a Google Sheet, which is nicely formatted, which has a real-time update for the scores for your game. Or you could even have charts and graphs within Sheets being live updated by code that's by data that's changing in real-time database, sort of plumbed into it with Cloud Functions. So I'm very terrible at working with Sheets. I wish I could put together a very nice demo with a nice, modify or like a live modified chart or graph. But in theory, you could totally do this. And so I think this is like super powerful. All right, so that's all the demo I have. If you want to learn more about Cloud Functions, we have documentations, we have video tutorials. Those video tutorials, that's basically all me talking. So if you didn't like to watch me talking just now, don't watch the videos, because it's just more of me talking, doing more demos. There's a ton of sample code. I think the samples, there's something like 30 or 40 different samples, much like the ones that I just did. There's a code lab you can walk through. And then I have a bunch of gists, which are like, actually, these two demos, the copy scores to sheet and the on-upload image, I have stored as gists. And also my GitHub repo is full of other projects where I use Cloud Functions. So the talk I'm giving later today about Android things, how I created a sort of a video doorbell, a lot of that is powered by Cloud Functions as well. So I really enjoy playing with it. And I'm not just paid to say that. I mean, I am paid to talk about Cloud Functions, but I have a lot of fun building with it. I mean, as you can see, it's pretty easy to write this connective glue between each one of your Firebase products in your app. And I think you should give it a try if you haven't done so already. That's all I've got. Thank you.